You set off a classified military alert because your HOA president thought my address plaque was too reflective. Now the Pentagon thinks I'm under cyber attack. I stared at the blinking red light above my door, and Karen, yes, that Karen, was still clutching Muffin the Pomeranian like it was a security badge. Meanwhile, NORAD had flagged my biometric scanner as breached, and in 28 minutes, a Department of Defense drone would be circling my lawn. All this because Karen couldn't mind her own business, and had absolutely no idea that the futuristic tech she just tried to vandalize was directly linked to one of the Pentagon's top-secret infrastructure projects. And now the real chaos was about to begin. If anyone had told me that retiring peacefully in a high-end neighborhood would lead to a federal security crisis, I would have laughed and turned off my work phone for good. I'd left that life behind, or at least I thought I had. When I bought the property, I had no intention of using it as a testbed for defense-grade smart technology. But the government had other plans. After 30 years developing top-tier AI defense systems, they asked me to field test one last project. A smart home defense unit with layered biometric security, encrypted communications, and a built-in response protocol tied to national defense infrastructure. My role was simple. Live a normal life. Don't draw attention. Log events. And never, under any circumstance, allow unauthorized access. Simple, right? Then came Karen. She wasn't even on the HOA board when I moved in. But 6 months later, she ran unopposed, made herself president, and began what neighbors jokingly called the clean lawn regime. She fined one guy for having a sunflower taller than 6 feet, sent threats to a mom whose mailbox had stickers. And me? She hated that my front gate had facial recognition and my address sign glowed in the dark. She called it un-American. She once yelled across the street, "This isn't a spy base. You don't get to pretend you're Batman here." I ignored it, mostly because the irony would have melted her brain if she knew I wasn't pretending. The real problem began when I installed the biometric perimeter alert panel. It was sleek, black, and mounted just outside the gate. The lettering below it read, "Defense monitoring active. Unauthorized access will trigger federal alert." Not a joke. Not a threat. A warning. But of course, to someone like Karen, it was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. She marched over one Saturday afternoon, wearing a visor, a tank top that said, HOA equals order, and dragging poor Muffin behind her like a hostage. "You can't post fake government warnings, it's against HOA Regulation 3.2.1.4 subsection C, she barked. I didn't even look up from my tablet. "It's not fake." Karen squinted. "Excuse me. The alert system. It's active. If you touch it, it triggers a multi-agency protocol." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Sure, and I'm Queen Elizabeth. You nerds with your toys and buzzwords. Maybe I'll test it myself. If this is your way of scaring people, it won't work with me." I knew better than to argue. With people like Karen, you don't fight logic with logic. You wait for nature, or natural consequences, to take its course. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, I got a notification while brushing my teeth. A fingerprint rejection had been logged. Someone had tampered with the scanner. I pulled up the security footage. There she was. Karen, poking the scanner with her nail, then banging on the gate with her HOA-issued clipboard. Muffin barked while she yelled something about citizens' inspections and making this place conform. I sighed and marked the log, preparing to report it to the agency liaison. It hadn't triggered anything serious yet, just warnings. But that was about to change. The second incident came that night. I was asleep when the backup alert went off. The red light on my ceiling pulsed, and a soft female voice whispered, "Zone breach. Tampering detected." I opened my phone. Same culprit. Karen, this time with a flashlight and garden gloves, poking at the panel like it was a malfunctioning soda machine. I quickly disabled the external lights so she wouldn't trip the infrared scan, but she had already pressed and held the override button for too long. The system went into silent lock mode. And worse, it had already sent a Level 3 alert to the regional Pentagon server, where, due to protocol, the system escalated the event. Now, to the average person, Level 3 sounds boring. But in this case, it meant my home had been flagged for potential unauthorized surveillance interference, possibly by hostile actors. Which meant, somewhere deep in the Rocky Mountains, a real person was now staring at my property on a map, asking questions. The next morning, everything seemed fine, until a neighbor named Denise walked over and whispered, "Lucas, why were there 3 unmarked black SUVs parked across from your house last night?" I shrugged. "Probably realtors." Denise gave me a look. "With earpieces? Okay, maybe not realtors." Karen strutted around the block like a peacock with a badge. "See? Told you. He's being watched. I'm filing a report with City Code Enforcement." What Karen didn't know was that the agents weren't watching me, they were watching her. Her face was already being analyzed in a federal database as part of the breach protocol. What they found probably confused them. A woman with no criminal record, multiple HOA committee chairs, and a disturbing number of noise complaints. No known affiliations with enemy nations, unless you count her weird admiration of North Korean law and order. Later that evening, I received a secure message from my old contact, Major Garrett. The subject line just read, "Confirm civilian status of breach party." I sighed and typed back, "Not a threat. Just a really annoying HOA president named Karen." He responded one line, "Keep the system armed. We're watching." Then came the real kicker. Tuesday afternoon, 3:44 p.m. Karen arrived wearing what I can only describe as a home inspector cosplay outfit. Clipboard, safety vest, sunglasses, and a utility belt. She marched to the gate, announced to no one in particular, "Time to get this cleaned up once and for all," and then pulled out what looked like a basic tool, but was actually a voltage tester. I didn't know what she planned to do, but when she touched the panel with it, the system registered an unauthorized device scan. That was it. The silent alarm reached phase 2. A drone, yes, an actual Department of Defense reconnaissance drone, was now being rerouted over my area for aerial validation. ETA, 29-minute. And Karen? She was still there, yelling at the gate, muffin barking, completely unaware that she was now officially part of a national defense incident log. And me? I was watching from the living room, eating popcorn, because I knew exactly what was coming next. And Karen? She was going to learn the hard way that poking the bear doesn't end well when the bear reports directly to the Pentagon. The next 24 hours felt like the eye of a storm. There was no obvious fallout, no trucks on the lawn, no sirens or armed escorts, just a very strange and surreal quiet across the neighborhood. The calm was almost worse than the chaos. I knew the system had escalated the breach to a federal surveillance level, and I knew Karen had been logged as the triggering party. But now came the real tension, waiting to see what the Department of Defense would do next, and more urgently, how Karen would overplay her hand. Because if I knew anything about her, and I knew plenty, she wasn't done. Around noon the next day, Denise, the neighborhood's de facto gossip conduit, showed up with a pair of lattes and a whisper that made me nearly choke on mine. Karen had organized a community compliance walk, which, as Denise explained between sips, meant she was going door to door under the pretense of checking if other residents were violating code. She was already on house number 7, clipboard in hand and sunglasses pushed dramatically up her forehead like she was leading a military parade. But it wasn't just a walk, it was a vendetta. She was rattled. Something had clearly shaken her confidence, and now she was projecting control in the only way she knew how, by overstepping every imaginable boundary. She hadn't yet reached my house, but I could feel the countdown ticking. At exactly 2:17 p.m., Karen strolled up to my front gate. She was wearing a tactical vest that looked like it had come from an Amazon cosplay section, complete with embroidered patches reading, HOA Field Ops and Civil Safety Division. She also had a GoPro mounted to her head, likely live streaming to whatever HOA Facebook group she hadn't yet been banned from. Behind her was poor Muffin, still leashed and now panting under the afternoon sun. I watched from the upstairs window as she approached the panel again, waving the same voltage meter like it was some kind of badge. Then she reached into her vest and pulled out a pair of bolt cutters. That's when I moved. I activated the interior lockdown protocol and set the system to passive observation. The device she was using wasn't just dangerous. It had a high enough charge to be flagged as a tampering device under the system's adaptive defense parameters. If she so much as nicked a single wired line, it would escalate her intrusion to Phase 3. Phase 3 wasn't funny. Phase 3 was real-time military surveillance with on-ground response potential. Sure enough, the moment those bolt cutters clamped down on the perimeter housing, a low-frequency pulse emitted from the unit. Karen stepped back in shock, startled by the humming. The red warning light above the scanner blinked twice, then went dark. That was the system silently signaling the federal net. Tampering confirmed. Her face appeared in 3 separate military threat databases, not because she was dangerous, but because the system couldn't distinguish stupidity from sabotage. As she started yelling into the gate camera, something about community integrity and forced access rights, I received a secure call. Not a phone call, not a text. A blinking light on my desk panel. I slid back the cover and tapped my fingerprint. A screen flickered on. It was General Marshall. He didn't look amused. "We received another alert," he said bluntly. "Same woman." I nodded. "She brought tools this time." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Lucas, we can't keep writing this off as a coincidence. If a civilian breaches the same system 3 times, protocol requires a formal contact trace. She doesn't know what she's messing with. No argument here. We're dispatching a recon team. You'll see them by morning. Let her keep talking, but keep her off the grid. We're flagging her as a civilian hazard." Then he paused. "One more thing. You're not to engage with her anymore. If she gets close again, the system will respond on its own." That last part chilled me more than I expected. The system was designed to be defensive, not aggressive. But it was adaptive. If it interpreted her actions as an evolving threat, it might initiate field testing procedures. And I had no intention of watching Karen get face-sprayed by a biometric foam cannon designed to immobilize assailants. The next day, the SUVs showed up. 3 of them, unmarked, but it was obvious they weren't Amazon drivers. They parked diagonally across the street like they'd rehearsed it, and 4 agents in casual gear stepped out and began surveying the area. They spoke with some neighbors, knocked on doors, acted like they were taking a consumer survey. Classic misdirection. Karen, meanwhile, was peeking from behind her curtains, recording them on her phone like she was the main character in a conspiracy thriller. Her latest post was titled, "Unmarked Vehicles Watching Me, What Are They Hiding?" with an aggressive string of emojis. She still believed I was running an illegal laboratory. That afternoon, I overheard her yelling at a neighbor that she suspected I had planted government-grade energy weapons under my yard. Apparently, her evidence was the fact that my grass was always green, and no normal grass grows like that unless something's powering it from below. That was the level of logic I was dealing with. Later that night, just past midnight, I caught her outside again on my security feed. This time, she was using a laser pointer and a magnifying glass to scan for surveillance reflections. The irony, of course, was that she was being watched by no fewer than 4 systems. Mine, the federal agents parked 1 block away, a DoD overhead drone, and her own GoPro footage that had now inadvertently become part of a case file. At 3 a.m., my security system issued a soft ping. Karen had breached the southern boundary of my fence, attempting to lift a panel of aluminum siding near the utility box. The system registered the breach, activated silent containment, and locked the perimeter magnetically. I watched as she struggled to pull it free, stepping into a tiny nook between the bushes and the fence. That's when the system deployed a deterrent, A high-frequency sound wave meant to disorient intruders. She stumbled backward, dizzy, and dropped her flashlight. I nearly stepped in to disable it, but before I could, she tripped over Muffin's leash and fell into her own ornamental shrubs. The security footage was gold. But more than that, it was proof. I compiled the last week's worth of clips and submitted them through the encrypted server. Within hours, the agents were at her door, not to arrest her, but to conduct what they referred to as a civilian mitigation assessment. Karen answered the door in full HOA regalia, still half asleep, and tried to assert that she was performing mandatory safety audits. She tried to fine them for being out of compliance with her made-up parking restrictions. That's when one of the agents pulled out a badge. Not a police badge, but a federal one. Karen went silent. They didn't arrest her. They didn't even yell. They simply informed her that she had unknowingly triggered a federal surveillance network, and that further tampering could result in charges ranging from interference with protected infrastructure to obstruction of homeland operations. She stammered something about being a patriotic watchdog, but they just handed her a formal warning and walked away. By Thursday evening, the tension in the air was so thick you could almost feel it hum beneath your skin. The neighborhood had taken on an eerie calm, like everyone had collectively agreed not to provoke whatever invisible boundary had been crossed. Word had spread, though unofficially, that something big had happened involving Karen and my house. The SUVs were still parked discreetly on the adjacent street, and I had noticed a few unmarked drones buzzing silently overhead at odd intervals. Most of the neighbors pretended not to notice them, but I knew that at least 3 families had reached out to the HOA asking if it was safe to remain in the area. The HOA, led by Karen, of course, responded with a statement so delusional it could have been a comedy sketch. She claimed that she had single-handedly exposed a rogue tech operation and was in ongoing communication with local and national authorities to ensure the community's safety. What she didn't mention was that those same national authorities had politely asked her to never approach my property again. But Karen wasn't one to accept defeat. Her pride wouldn't allow it. The warning she'd received from federal agents had done something strange to her. It didn't humble her or scare her into silence. Instead, it emboldened her, like she now believed she had uncovered some massive conspiracy and was being silenced. She started carrying around a tiny bodycam clipped to her cardigan and wore her fake HOA tactical vest like it was armor. Worse, she began documenting every movement near my property, narrating her footage in a breathless, dramatic whisper like she was a reporter embedded in a war zone. "You see that?" she'd say, pointing to my mail being delivered. "Unmarked package. Probably encrypted messages." Then she'd zoom in on my sprinklers. Why are they on at precisely 5:06 p.m. every evening? Clearly coded behavior. Possibly signaling. And of course, poor Muffin was always dragged into these excursions, waddling behind her like a hostage who just wanted to sniff fire hydrants in peace. I remained silent, carefully logging each encounter, every attempt she made to approach or record or tamper. The Pentagon system had learned her pattern now. It recognized her gait, her voice, her heat signature. She was flagged as a recurring nuisance, not a national threat, but a localized variable that required containment if certain thresholds were crossed. And on Saturday morning, she crossed it. It was just after 9 a.m. when I received the first alert. Perimeter breach, Eastern Sector. Karen had managed to climb onto a neighbor's garbage bin and hop the shared wall into the side yard of my property. She wore what looked like a construction helmet, carried a handheld radio scanner, and appeared to be talking to someone, though there was no one in sight. She had constructed a narrative in her mind that she wasn't alone in this, that she was coordinating with concerned citizens to collect evidence. The scanner in her hand wasn't even on a real frequency. It was stuck on the static channel, emitting white noise. She thought she was intercepting signals. In truth, she was triggering the one thing the system had yet to deploy: biometric containment. I sprinted to my office console and tried to override it, But I was too late. The system had entered Phase 4, subject containment for unauthorized bioentry. She was now inside the inner zone of the testing grid, exactly where the Pentagon had asked me to never allow civilians. The command was automatic. The structure she had entered, a separate garage space designed for thermal data collection, sealed behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss. She turned around to leave and found herself trapped. Her body cam kept rolling, broadcasting her panic. "I'm being imprisoned," she yelled. "They've locked me in some sort of underground bunker." It wasn't a bunker. It was just a sealed smart garage with temperature calibration systems. But to someone like Karen, every surface was a secret weapon. She began pacing, slapping at walls, screaming into her camera that she was being targeted. She tried to press buttons, poke lenses, even yell commands like, "Open Sesame," and "I know my rights." None of them worked. The system simply monitored her vital signs, sent out a silent ping to federal ops, and began analyzing her speech for distress patterns. Within 6 minutes, I had a message from General Marshall himself. One line. "Stay out. We're watching." I waited. Karen's livestream had about 20 viewers when I last checked, mostly people from her book club and one guy named Hot Dog Fan 123, who kept commenting with alien emojis. But as the stream dragged on and her hysteria ramped up, someone clipped a section of her shouting about biodefense lasers and uploaded it to social media. Within 2 hours, it had gone viral. The headline read, "Local HOA President Trapped in High-Tech Doom Bunker Claims She's the New Snowden." By mid-afternoon, Karen was trending. Meanwhile, I stood in my backyard, watching agents approach my gate from the street. They gave a subtle nod and entered with a code I hadn't shared, meaning their system access now superseded mine. They moved quietly, efficiently, and retrieved Karen without incident. She had curled up under a utility table by the time they opened the door, muttering about waterboarding and digital prisons. They walked her to an unmarked vehicle and drove off. No drama. No sirens. Just a whisper of wind and the echo of her unhinged narration left behind. That night, I received a secure transmission. Not a reprimand, not a warning. A thank you. The agents had completed their analysis, and Karen's intrusion had offered valuable unintentional data. The biometric system had behaved precisely as designed. Civilian containment without physical harm. Real-world reaction captured. They even asked if I'd be willing to submit a debrief report on her psychological profile. I declined. I'd had enough of Karen for one lifetime. But her story wasn't done. Because the video of her trapped in the garage kept spreading. News outlets picked it up. Meme pages made edits. A TikTok influencer reenacted her entire rant using a chihuahua and a drone vacuum. Overnight, Garage Karen became an internet legend. She was mocked, analyzed, memed into oblivion. And yet, she didn't hide. She doubled down. Sunday morning, a new HOA newsletter hit our inboxes. Karen had written it herself. "My fellow residents," it began, "you may have seen malicious propaganda circulating regarding a recent event involving your HOA leadership. Let me assure you, I was on a sanctioned inspection when I was illegally detained by unauthorized surveillance personnel. I am currently exploring legal action and will be holding an emergency meeting to address these threats to our liberty." The woman was delusional, but persistent. Neighbors began to distance themselves. Denise texted me a screenshot of the newsletter with the caption, "She's gone full bunker." Others ignored her. Some even apologized. But the damage was done. Karen had gone too far. Not just with me, not just with the federal agencies, but with the very people she once lorded over. She was now a punchline in her own community. And yet, I knew this wasn't over. By Monday morning, it was impossible to avoid the storm Karen had stirred up online. Her livestream had morphed into a national curiosity, and within 24 hours, she'd become an overnight sensation, not in the way she wanted, of course. Talk shows were replaying her meltdown. YouTubers made reaction videos. A late-night host even aired a parody sketch where an actress dressed as Karen tried to free herself from a haunted microwave. The entire country was laughing and Karen was fuming. From the comfort of my living room, I watched the ripple effect as it stretched from our tiny neighborhood all the way to Capitol Hill. What had started as a woman with a clipboard and too much time on her hands had now escalated into a full-blown federal embarrassment. Despite the media chaos, Karen refused to back down. If anything, she leaned harder into her fantasy. By midday, she had called an emergency HOA meeting, allegedly to address community concerns over foreign surveillance equipment and property detainment violations. She hand-delivered letters to every house, printed in Comic Sans, accusing me of engaging in military-grade psychological warfare. I didn't attend the meeting, of course, but a neighbor sent me a video. Karen stood at the front of the clubhouse, flanked by 2 folding chairs with American flags stuck in plant pots behind her, giving what could only be described as a campaign speech. She talked about restoring order to the neighborhood, protecting the innocent, and making sure the deep state doesn't spy on our yards. There were only 4 people in attendance, and 2 of them had wandered in thinking it was bingo night. But while Karen was busy trying to rally imaginary troops, something else was brewing behind the scenes. Unbeknownst to her, the Pentagon had convened a low-profile committee to review the events surrounding her trespass. Apparently, her behavior, though comical, had highlighted a previously untested vulnerability: civilian escalation without external provocation. They weren't worried about her specifically. They were worried about how systems like mine might be affected if people like Karen became widespread. So, in a bizarre twist of events, the government decided to use Karen as a case study. And they weren't going to do it quietly. The first sign came when a news van showed up in front of her house. Then another. Then 3 more. Journalists camped out on her lawn, eager to get the real story behind the woman who got trapped in a high-tech garage and claimed she was kidnapped by cyber soldiers. At first, Karen loved the attention. She posed for photos, handed out prepared statements, and even offered coffee to reporters. She spoke about bravery, about the right to question authority, about her role as a defender of suburban freedoms. But the tone shifted quickly. When the news teams started asking for actual evidence of her claims, she floundered. She showed them her clipboard. She talked about the humming she heard. She pointed at my property and whispered, "There are tunnels under there." Tunnels and frequencies. Naturally, it only made her look worse. But the breaking point came 2 days later, when Karen received a formal summons to appear before a Congressional Oversight Subcommittee. Apparently, one of the defense contractors involved in my project had flagged her case as an example of civilian interference gone wrong. Congress wanted answers, and Karen, thrilled at the opportunity to go national, didn't realize she was walking straight into a political buzzsaw. The hearing was closed to the public, but leaks spread within hours. Karen, dressed in a navy blue suit 3 sizes too big, had arrived carrying a stack of homemade diagrams showing laser networks and smart fence espionage routes. Witnesses said she rambled about radiation levels and biometric sabotage, and that at one point, she tried to show the committee a drawing of Muffin in a hazmat suit as proof of contamination. By the end of her testimony, half the room was fighting back laughter, and the other half was dead silent in disbelief. One representative reportedly asked if she believed aliens were involved, to which she replied, "Not directly, but I have my suspicions." The aftermath was swift. Karen was not only dismissed from the HOA board by a unanimous vote, but also served with a restraining order that prohibited her from coming within 20 feet of my property or the federal equipment it housed. She was no longer the queen of the cul-de-sac. She was now the neighborhood warning story. Parents used her example to teach their kids about boundaries. "Don't be a Karen" became something of a mantra. But just as things were starting to settle, Karen returned. Not in the same way, not with the same fire, but with a quiet, simmering intensity. She stopped yelling in public. She stopped recording. She didn't host any more meetings or pass out flyers. Instead, she started watching. From her porch. From the shadows between trees. She would sit in her garden chair, arms folded, sunglasses on, staring in the direction of my house for hours. She wasn't done. She was planning. I knew she wasn't going to attempt another break-in. Not after everything that happened. But her obsession had shifted. It wasn't about control anymore, it was about revenge. So when I received a notification that someone had submitted a formal complaint to the county about my property being a risk to public safety, I didn't even need to guess who filed it. And when a city official came by with a clipboard and a forced smile, I invited him inside, gave him a full tour, showed him the permits, and offered him a cup of coffee while he inspected the system from 10 feet away. He left satisfied, even amused. But 2 days later, another complaint was filed. Then another. Karen was weaponizing the bureaucracy. But what she didn't realize was that the Pentagon was still watching. Not because of me, not even because of her, but because the project was still ongoing. Every new complaint was logged, every visit documented. She was creating a digital trail that only worked against her. And then came the final twist. One I didn't see coming. I woke up one morning to find an official envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a plaque. A gold-trimmed, government-issued plaque that read, "Designated National Defense Infrastructure, Tier 1 Prototype Site." Along with it was a letter authorizing the installation of a sign at the edge of my lawn stating the same. The project had been reviewed, deemed successful, and my property was now officially protected under national defense classification. Karen hadn't shut me down. She had elevated me. The sign went up that same day. A simple post, dark gray with gold lettering, professionally mounted next to my gate. Karen saw it within minutes. She stood frozen at the end of her driveway, mouth slightly open, holding muffin like a stunned spectator at a magic trick gone wrong. She didn't say a word. Didn't storm over. Didn't call the police or wave a clipboard. She just stood there, staring at the proof that everything she'd tried to destroy had only made me more untouchable. And that evening, for the first time in months, I saw her lights turn off early. No cameras. No staring. Just darkness. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because the Karen I knew didn't retreat quietly. She was regrouping. And when she came back, and I was certain she would, it wouldn't be with bolt cutters or body cams. It would be with something far more dangerous. A plan. The calm after the Congressional storm didn't last. A week had passed since the federal sign was mounted on my lawn, and the neighborhood had begun to reset itself. Karen had seemingly vanished into her own shell. The porch that was once her observation post now sat empty. The security lights she used to flash toward my house every hour like she was signaling enemy ships remained dark. Neighbors speculated that she had gone out of town or perhaps taken a long overdue break from her self-imposed war on normalcy. I knew better. Karen wasn't gone. She was coiled. Silent. Waiting. I kept to my routine, quiet mornings, system checks, remote diagnostics. The project had moved into a new phase now. The Pentagon had assigned a civilian liaison to provide weekly reports, and I'd been cleared to upgrade the external sensors to full-spectrum monitoring. All standard procedure. Nothing flashy. Nothing new to Karen. And that, I suspected, would bother her more than anything. Her goal hadn't been justice or rules, or even security. It was attention, power. And she'd lost every ounce of both. She hadn't just lost her HOA title or the public favor. She'd lost relevance. That was why, when I woke one morning to find a QR code sticker plastered to my federal sign, I didn't panic. I scanned it from a distance with a drone camera. The link led to a crudely made blog titled, "Eyes on the Enemy," the real story behind the neighborhood spy base. And sure enough, it was written by Kay Holloway, civic watchdog. The posts were absurd. She claimed the government had implanted sensors in local squirrels. that my garden shed was a satellite dish in disguise, that Muffin had developed neurological shaking from electromagnetic radiation emitted by my mailbox. It would have been hilarious if not for the fact that the site was already gaining traction. Someone had found it, shared it, and turned it into yet another viral curiosity. Memes were being made again. Except now, she wasn't just the butt of the joke, she was steering the narrative. I didn't respond. I didn't take the sticker down. The system tagged it as harmless and moved on. But the fact that she had crept up to my gate again, after everything, meant she still hadn't learned. Or maybe she simply didn't care. Whatever line had once separated bold from reckless had vanished entirely. She was now operating in delusion full-time. The next evening, the lights went out across 3 Street. A transformer blew near the edge of the neighborhood during a storm, knocking out power from dusk till midnight. Most residents huddled indoors or lit candles. I stayed up, monitoring my backup systems. The federal power node I had installed kicked in without issue. Lights, security, comms, all operational. At 9:43 p.m., I noticed movement near the southern fence. Human-sized heat signature. Crouching. Slow-moving. It wasn't an animal. The cameras turned in focus. It was Karen. She wore black clothing, poorly chosen, still reflective in infrared, and had a set of what looked like kitchen tools in a plastic tote. The panel near the fence blinked red. The system flagged her as a re-entry risk. I didn't call it in. I let the system track her. She stopped at the fence line and began what I can only describe as digging with a spatula. There was no logical plan. No defined goal. She was attacking shadows, trying to break something she didn't understand, with no strategy beyond rage. She was muttering, loud enough for the system's directional mic to catch. They think they can control everything. Think they can make me look stupid. I know what this place really is. I know. The rain intensified. Thunder rumbled. And then, in a surreal turn, Karen pulled a walkie-talkie from her pocket and started talking into it. Agent K to base. Surveillance node is weak at Quadrant 4. Repeat, Quadrant 4 has an opening. Proceed with blackout plan. Awaiting confirmation. No one responded. There was no base. No team. Karen was role-playing a conspiracy fantasy in real life, completely unmoored from reality. She wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a risk, to herself, to others. And just as I considered intervening, she did something that changed everything. She struck the fence panel with a crowbar. There was a flash. A sharp crack. And then she was on the ground. The system had discharged a mild deterrent, less powerful than a taser, but enough to knock her back and disable her tool. She screamed, crawled away on her hands and knees, and vanished behind the hedges. I dispatched an alert to the Pentagon liaison. This time, it wasn't logged as trespassing. It was logged as sabotage. The next day, a formal investigation began. This wasn't a local matter anymore. Karen had breached a federally protected site while impersonating federal communications. She had fabricated calls, posted disinformation, and attempted physical damage to government infrastructure. That crossed into felony territory. I was told to keep my distance. Let the process unfold. But Karen, predictably, didn't go quietly. She gave an interview to a fringe online network, claiming she was being hunted for uncovering the truth. She said I was working with foreign agents, that her entire dog-walking route had been mapped by satellites, and that the real HOA had been dissolved and replaced by imposters. It was laughable. It was tragic. And it was everywhere. Still, she underestimated just how closely the government had been watching. A week later, federal vehicles pulled up not to my house, but to hers. They knocked gently. She answered, still in pajamas, holding Muffin like a shield. She didn't scream. She didn't resist. She simply blinked, nodded, and stepped aside. It wasn't an arrest. It was a mental health hold. She was taken to a secure facility for evaluation under a court order. The neighborhood didn't cheer. It didn't gossip. It just sighed. The war was over, and all that was left was the echo of what could have been a normal life, shattered by obsession. A month passed. The blog was deleted. The signs came down. The HOA reorganized without her. And I planted lavender where the sticker had once been. Life resumed. Then, one quiet evening, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a plain envelope, handwritten. I thought I understood the world. I didn't. I made you a villain because I didn't know how to be anything but the hero. I'm sorry, Kay. There was no way to know if it was sincere. No way to tell if it was genuine clarity or just another cycle in her unpredictable spiral. But I kept the letter. Not because I needed it, but because sometimes even the most unhinged stories deserve a closing line. The Pentagon eventually declassified portions of the project and published a quiet press release noting its success. No names. No addresses. Just data. I stayed on as a consultant. The house remained active. The signs stayed posted. And Karen? She moved out 6 months later. No goodbye. No final monologue. Just an empty house and a for sale sign swaying in the wind. In the end, she didn't just lose her war against me. She lost to the truth. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't chase, and doesn't need permission to stand. Because when your enemy is logic, the battle ends long before they realize it even started.